Can a 10-second penalty change the course of an entire season? How fair is Formula One really when not even its rules are applied equally? Today I tell you how a single decision by the FIA provoked Ferrari's total fury, and why this could be the start of an open war against the management of Formula One. The 2025 Mexican Grand Prix had been generating enormous expectations for several reasons. Not only was it a special race because of the fervor of the local public, but also because of the particular context that surrounded Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton. After a hesitant start to the season, the seven-time world champion arrived at a circuit that had historically favored him, with the real possibility of breaking a drought of more than 20 races without getting on the podium. Everything pointed to it being his great redemption dressed in red. But instead, what happened was one of the most controversial decisions of the year. Everything broke out on lap 6. Until then, the race was marked by a chaotic start, some minor contacts and a first lap in which multiple drivers, including Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc, cut corners in the stadium area without any penalty. What seemed like a simple start to the race ended up being key to what would come later. On that 6th lap, Hamilton and Verstappen found themselves in a direct battle for 4th position. Both had been running at similar times, and in turn 1, the Dutchman launched a determined attack on the inside. The movement was aggressive, but within the limits of what is allowed by current piloting guidelines. The Red Bull's front axle was ahead of the Ferrari at the turning point, which according to the regulations gave it the right to the line. However, this caused Hamilton to have to go slightly off course to avoid contact, and a chain of events began that would culminate in his punishment. Hamilton, attempting to keep up the fight in the following corners, was forced to cut to the outside at turn 4 to avoid a direct collision with Verstappen. He did so seeking to maintain the car's inertia and defend his position. But that maneuver, seen in isolation, was interpreted by the stewards as an unfair gain of advantage. An investigation was immediately opened that ended in a 10-second penalty, one of the harshest penalties that have been imposed so far this year for a maneuver of this type. The problem was not just the punishment but the entire context in which it was given. Minutes earlier, Verstappen had cut a corner using more than 100 meters of grass on the first lap. Nobody said anything. Leclerc did something similar. No flag, no warning, no penalty. Only Hamilton was punished. And that unleashed the storm. In addition, it is important to consider the type of circuit in which everything took place. The Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez is a route where overtaking is extremely complex, not only because of the narrowness of the straights but also because of the altitude. At more than 2,200 meters above sea level, the density of the air is lower and that dramatically affects aerodynamic performance. Cars lose charge, DRS is less effective and engine power is also slightly compromised. In this context, a 10-second penalty is not just a penalty. It is a direct sentence that destroys any strategy. And that's exactly what happened. Hamilton went from being in the fight for the top 5 to falling to 8th position, even losing the possibility of scoring key points for the Constructors' Championship. But beyond the numbers, what was broken that day was trust. The trust of a team in the impartiality of those who must guarantee sporting justice. Ferrari didn't take it as a simple bad decision. They interpreted it as institutional aggression. As one more example of a pattern of unbalanced decisions that punish some more harshly than others, depending on the name, the team, or the moment. And if we add to that Hamilton himself came from an extremely demanding adaptation process to the SF25, with months of technical work to adapt his braking style to that of Leclerc, with hours in the simulator and enormous media pressure for the results, we will understand why this penalty was not just one more. It was the last straw. It didn't take long for the paddock to explode. From the pits, to former drivers on television, to analysts and fans on social networks, everyone began to ask themselves the same question. Why only Hamilton? Why on this occasion did the FIA decide to be so inflexible, when in other similar maneuvers they did not even intervene? That question, still without a clear answer, is what transforms this incident into one of the most tense of the year. Ferrari had worked throughout the previous season to regain tactical credibility and strategic consistency. He had reduced errors in the pits, improved his internal communication and refined his car in terms of aerodynamic balance. But none of these improvements are useful if the system that regulates the competition seems to operate with different rules depending on the driver or the team. What happened in Mexico was not a simple bad weekend. It was a fracture. A moment that, if not resolved with transparency, can leave deep scars in the relationship between Ferrari, its drivers, and the race management itself. If one thing was clear after the 2025 Mexican Grand Prix, it was that Ferrari was not willing to remain silent. The sanction imposed on Lewis Hamilton unleashed an immediate and visceral reaction throughout the prancing horse environment. But it was not a simple temporary frustration, nor a one-time anger. What was seen was a true institutional challenge, an act of verbal rebellion against the International Automobile Federation that, according to many inside and outside the paddock, could mark a before and after in the relationship between the teams and the regulatory bodies. The first to speak was Fred Vasseur. At a press conference, without filters or ambiguities, he said a phrase that will go down to Formula One. 10 seconds. I don't remember when someone got 10 seconds for something like that. That statement, seemingly simple, is a rhetorical bomb. Because it not only calls into question the proportionality of the punishment, but also questions the historical coherence of the penalty system. Vasseur was not just talking about Hamilton's punishment. It spoke of a pattern, of a line that was broken. He was pointing out that the FIA had crossed a line, that he had lost all notion of equity. But his speech did not remain superficial. The French engineer explained with surgical clarity why the punishment was unacceptable. He talked about the Mexican layout, the altitude, the poor overtaking capacity, how a 10-second penalty on a circuit like that is equivalent, in real terms, to an annihilation of any strategy. With 5 seconds, he said Hamilton would have finished fourth. But at 10 he was pushed out of the fighting zone. And that small nuance changes the impact of the punishment from a warning to a sentence. Furthermore, Vasseur revealed something that many already sensed, but that until now no one at the management level had dared to verbalize so openly: the lack of uniformity in the application of the regulations. He directly compared Hamilton's maneuver to that of Verstappen on the first lap, who cut 100 meters of grass and did not receive a single warning. He also made reference to other similar actions by Leclerc and other drivers. The conclusion was devastating. If everyone does the same thing, why is only one punished? That question is more than a criticism. It's an accusation. A direct indication of favoritism, of arbitrariness, of a system where the regulations are not the same for everyone. And when a team with the historical and political weight of Ferrari sends a message like this, the repercussion transcends sports. Charles Leclerc, always more reserved in his statements, also broke his usual restrained tone to support his team. Although he was more diplomatic in his language, his words were just as devastating. He acknowledged that he himself had made similar maneuvers without punishment, and was baffled by the decision to exclusively penalize his teammate. This solidarity between teammates is not only rare in a competitive environment like Formula One, but it also shows that within Ferrari there is total unity in the face of what they consider to be a flagrant injustice. What happened in Mexico is apparently an arbitration error. But in reality, it is a crack in the structure. A crack that can expand rapidly if it is not repaired with intelligence, with reforms, and above all, with political will. The ball is in the FIA's court. What you do or don't do in the coming weeks will define not only the resolution of a conflict, but the direction of the entire season. Formula One is much more than speed, technology, and visual spectacle. It is also a reflection of what happens when human talent, cutting-edge engineering, and extreme competition collide with the margins of human judgment. And what happened in Mexico 2025 was not simply a controversial sanction. It was a fracture in the relationship between those who compete and those who judge. A crack that forces us to ask ourselves much deeper questions. What is the point of having the best pilots in the world if they cannot trust the neutrality of those who administer justice? How do you build a credible championship if the criteria change from one Sunday to the next? To what extent can a sports narrative be sustained without transparency, without consistency, without real responsibility? Ferrari raised his voice. Hamilton, despite his experience, looked at the stewards again with the frustration of someone who feels that the game is tilted according to name and context. Leclerc made it clear that it is not just about poorly applied rules, but a power structure that urgently needs review. And the rest of the paddock, although silently, watches closely, because everyone knows that next could be them. This is no longer just a conversation between teams and the FIA. It is a matter for all of us who love this sport. It's a question of integrity. And if one thing became clear this week, it is that Formula One is at a crossroads. And now I ask you the question: do you think Hamilton's penalty was fair? Or are we seeing the birth of a rift between the FIA and the teams that could change the history of the championship forever? Leave me your answer in the comments what you think about all this.